Avtar Meher Baba ki jai. So let's start with the seven realities. Either of you, Mamaji, are in a position to read?
Yes, yes,
Yeah, please go ahead. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. The seven realities: existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or the performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following. One, the only real existence is that of the one and only God, who is the self in every finite self. The only real love is the love for this infinity God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. The only real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. The only real renunciation is that which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. The only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and in so called bad, in saint and in so called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand, without expectation of reward. When compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. The only real control is the discipline of senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. The only real surrender is that in which poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with the perfect calm to the will of God. Avtar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Meher Baba ki jai. Thank you so much for that. And with that, we get into um, God Speaks. God Speaks is, I would say, the reason Meher Baba Awakens was born uh, back in 2020, when literally we started reading this book together, and then the rest is history, as they say famously, right? So, like Ashok pointed out a couple of weeks back, or maybe yesterday, we are reading God Speaks for the third time. I hope all of us have learned something new and added value to ourselves and to our spiritual progress in each of the readings, and in the same way in the reading that we are going to embark on now. This time, we are grouping the reading of God Speaks and Beams together, just as Baba would have liked it, simply because Beams as a book or a booklet was an addition or a clarificatory note to questions people were asking about God Speaks. So, from a timeline perspective, God Speaks was written first, then Beams was published, and then there was a revised edition of God Speaks, the second edition, which is what we are going to be using as a soft copy. Right? So, um, pretty exciting to even start reading the book that Baba said is the magnum opus, is the most important thing that we need to read without fail as human beings. And of course, to some, he said, read it till it runs in your veins. So I think let's read it for a few hundred times before it starts running in our veins. But with that, I think I'll open the floor for any comments before we start. Okay, just some logistics. Here are the book links in the board, and you know that we already have charts in God Speaks as a separate file, which is useful if we are referring the chart without having to open everything. And then this is the large Lud dimple chart, which is the pullout in the last page. So as we make progress, we will add the study details. Oops, there's a typo here. Okay.
Are we reading the second or third edition?
The third edition. The second edition, third printing.
Third printing.
Yeah. So I think there was only the second edition. There was nothing after that. So uh, let's start with the front matter of the book. It's always a good idea to set the right context. So with that, yeah, maybe because there was a question on editions, let me start with that. So this is the second edition printed in 1973, and the third printing was done in 1997. Short publication history. God Speaks was first published by Dodd Mead, New York in 1955. Its revised and enlarged second edition was published by Sufism Reoriented, Walnut Creek, California in 1973. The third printing of the second edition, though it did not in any way revise the text, changed the pagination. This third printing of the second edition was republished in its first Indian edition by Meher Maunavani Publications, Hyderabad, India, in 2001. This online release, provided by the current publisher and copyright holder, is a digital facsimile of the 1997 third printing of the second edition. So this is just a standard text on any book that's published in ebook by the trust. There's Baba's Washington, D.C. pic taken in 1956. Photo credit Lawrence Reiter. God Speaks, the theme of creation and its purpose by Meher Baba. So if you go further, yeah, the dedication to the universe, the illusion that sustains reality. It's the most intriguing, um, thought-provoking, question-provoking, and I dare say, even confusing dedication that you would ever see, right? Why is Baba dedicating this to universe? Why is Baba saying the illusion sustains bigger reality? So, any comments, any questions, any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a comment. Jay
Sure.
Baba, this is Mahu.
Jai Baba Mahu.
Uh, uh, First of all, it is very important to know that this saying is not Baba's. This saying is by Ira Dietrich. I think I
Dietrich.
can pronounce it.
Ira
Dietrich.
Dietrich.
Ira
Yeah.
Dietrich has written this, and
Oh,
he's
really?
the actually he's the editor of I don't remember which revision and which prints, but this is by Ira. It is not by Meher Baba, and this many people thought that is Meher Baba. No, it is not. And of course, the whole thing is being dictated the Ivy Deuce and Don Stevens, and chapter. The 10th state of God is Erech, it's just different
Erech,
people
yes.
took different parts on it, but is dictated, everything is dictated by Meher Baba, but this one isn't. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I can
Thank you
also
very much
comment
for
about what
sharing
my
that. Ira is someone I met multiple times. Both, I think I met him in India 2 times and also in California. So he's the
oh
one that
good.
is on the publishing side. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, and in fact, he's the one that has granted the. I mean, that's how I got permission for sharing all the Sufism books online and so on and so forth. So interesting. So I did not know this at all. And in fact, uh, this is something that we discussed and paused upon every time we read it. But I believe that if it is not Baba's, and given Baba has uh, thoroughly gone through all the drafts of this book, I think credit should be given, or rather, credit should be taken when his name is not. I mean, you cannot attribute a personal quote without mentioning it, is what I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I may have it somewhere, but there is, he wrote about it, how Ira has written a page or two about this dedication and how he came up with it.
Wow.
So, yeah, it is available somewhere, but I may have it. I don't even know where it is.
So, but
So, yeah.
do you remember what he says? I mean, uh, is there a.
No, 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 I don't remember, but neither
Okay.
I care. Neither I care. What I care is what Meher Baba says here. Let's not lose the
I know.
focus.
True.
Seriously.
True.
Yeah.
So
Um,
this I said is the charts, and anytime we need the charts, we can always go here, where I've actually created another file with just the charts so that it's easier to search the document and go back and forth. So without obstructing our flow. So there are 16 charts, including the big one, which is the terms chart, the Lud dimple chart. So, yeah, again, there is a note. This volume is a reprint of the revised and enlarged second edition, first printed in 1973. The substantive content of the book remains unchanged. Design and layout have been modernized. The format has been slightly altered for grammatical and stylistic consistency.
mhm.
Contents. So it has a preface, there's an introduction to the first edition and introduction to the second edition. And I suggest we read all three. Uh, so we'll start with the preface to the first edition. A number of factors have entered into the writing and editing of this volume, which require some word of explanation. Through the medium of his alphabet board, Meher Baba has dictated in its entirety the present contents of the major portion of this work, consisting of parts 1 through 8. Parts 9 and 10, the 10 states of God, and the conclusion were written by Irach B. Jesawala in elaboration of notes dictated to him by Meher Baba and are a recapitulation of the previous sections dictated directly by Meher Baba. Certain footnotes have been added by the editors using both previously published and unpublished statements by Meher Baba, as well as illustrative quotations rendered in free form from the great mystic poets of the East. In addition, several footnotes and the supplement to this work include notes taken down by some disciples of Meher Baba, including the Sufi disciple of more than 25 years standing, the late Dr. Abdul Ghani Munsif, and are based on Baba's explanations and used with his permission. The translation of the Persian poem, The Ascending Soul, on page 30, is reprinted from Reynold A. Nicholson's Rumi, Poet and Mystic, published by George Allen and Unwin Limited. The quotation from the Bhagavad Gita found on page 20 of the introduction is reprinted from Sir Edwin Arnold's The Song Celestial, published by Routledge and Keegan Paul Limited. for permission to reprint these translations. Grateful thanks are due to the above publishers. The complete contents of God Speaks have been carefully corrected and approved by Meher Baba. The function of the present editors has been one primarily of handling certain mechanical details necessary in rendering any work into final form for publication. They would hardly have undertaken even this minor function in relation to so fundamental a document had they not been specifically requested to do so by the author. Their own relationship to Sufism reoriented should not be misconstrued by those few persons who are aware of the connection. Meher Baba's pronouncements have always been without sectarian purpose or bias. He has often made direct statements to the effect that he appreciates all isms, Sufism, Vedantism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, etc., religious and political parties for the many good things that they seek to achieve, but does not and cannot belong to any of them. He regards absolute truth as including and transcending them all, and his function as being detached from all these divine paths, awakening the followers of these divine paths to their real meaning and true spirit. The unity of all life is integral and indivisible. It remains unassailable and inviolable in spite of all ideological differences. The reader will soon become aware of the fact that numerous passages of God Speaks are distinctively repetitive. If this work were intended to clarify or restate some reasonably well known theorem of current culture, it would perhaps be desirable to arrange the work in simple logical sequence and allow the thesis to unfold in brief finality. However, God Speaks not only picks up the fragments of many previous concepts of spiritual truth and arranges them in orderly and mutually compatible fashion, but it takes the entire subject several steps further than it has historically existed and establishes several new and detailed thought patterns. To do this effectively, it seems necessary to look at the subject matter again and again from a number of angles and with increasing conceptual proliferation. Illustrations and anecdotes are often repeated in these various circumstances in order that each portion may be self contained, thus obviating the necessity of the readers referring back to earlier passages for details, which might be omitted in a later context. The net result is not unlike the effect achieved musically in the constant elaborating theme of a Ravel's bolero or a Bach fugue from the well-tempered clavichord. Although it would seem at first a minor item, one of the most troublesome issues in undertaking the editing of this work has been the establishing of a consistent policy for capitalization of words. The normal procedure of reserving such usage for proper names, the deity, and his immediate attributes is brought to a sorry dilemma in a work which has as its major thesis the divinity of all creation. To establish such a connotation in strict literality, I'll repeat, to establish such a connotation in strict literality would result in a flood of capital letters, which not only would not aid in emphasizing such a thesis, but would obstruct the progress of the reader. How that makes sense? It's basically on the capitalization of the God and God linked terms. This matter is made even more puzzling by the subtle fashion in which Meher Baba gradually draws the consciousness of the reader from the concept of God in his unmanifest states to those stages of development in which the individualized soul is apparently furthest from realizing his essential eternal oneness with God. Strictly rational policy on capitalizations during such a progression of development, ending in a final return to full union with the Father, is apparently unobtainable. and therefore the editors have adopted the more feasible usage of capitalizing the deity and his immediate attributes, and thereafter have used capitals primarily for the sake of emphasis and helping the reader to distinguish readily between conditions associated with the higher as contrasted with the more gross planes. For example, energy is capitalized E energy of the subtle planes compared to nuclear energy. Similar problems were encountered in as mechanical a process as punctuation. In the complex issues which Meher Baba sorts out for meticulous elucidation, strict adherence to classic rules of punctuation would result in an almost unendurable jumble of commas, colons, dashes, and semicolons. Here again, the editors have adopted an arbitrary policy of deliberately avoiding meticulous usage of punctuation within a sentence as long as the thought flow readily. In many instances, Meher Baba has coined terms to express a specific concept. It has seemed preferable to ensure exact understanding of his intent rather than to render the work more conventional by substitution of well-seasoned terminology which almost expresses the content of the coined phrase. Inverted and complex sentence structure has also been left in numberless instances where possible ambiguity or a breaking of the flow of thought seemed to result from reinversion of structure or shortening of sentences. In brief, the function of the editor is to render a work into conventional usage and for ready assimilation. Whether the present editors have found this inconsistent with the major purpose of the work, conventional usage and simplicity of style have been happily sacrificed for specificity of intent. Please pause me, stop me anytime you want to discuss anything, but this is more technical stuff, technical editorial stuff. It would not do to leave the mechanical phase without cautioning the reader that most writers differentiate between the terms knowledge and wisdom, assigning a more valued or spiritual function to the latter. Meher Baba makes no such differentiation and uses knowledge rather in the sense of true knowledge. After intense concentration on this volume, some readers may wish to broaden their knowledge of Meher Baba's viewpoint on the subject of the finite and the infinite. Additional valuable material is contained in his discourses in 5 volumes published by Meher Publications, Ahmednagar, India, as well as in Meher Baba's foreword to Dr. William Donkin's The Wayfarers, and also chapter 1 of that work. And this is written in January 23rd, on January 23rd, 1955, Washington, D.C., by the two people that Mahu mentioned some time back, Ivy Deuce and Don Stevens, who are primarily responsible for putting this together. Now, by the way, if you recollect, we did do a lot of work trying to document what we found in the Wayfarers. We have the presentation of the states, we have the progression of the souls through the planes, we have the definition of the adept, initiate, adept, advanced pilgrims. We have the Sufi terms for it. We have also documented it. And of course, in discourses, we have gone through multiple times on the divine, the limited exposure to the divine theme that discourses has. Limited in the sense, discourses is a lot more broad. That's all I mean. So the two footnotes were republished in 1 volume by Sharia Press 1987. That's about discourses. And again, it was reprinted in 1988. Okay, so now the first edition had its own introduction, which is what we're going to read now. God, has never spoken in my presence, but I am sure that I have seen him act in human form. That is the only manner in which I can explain the incredible sensitivity of action and reaction which characterized Meher Baba during those brief periods on a Saturday afternoon in New York when I first saw him in action. He was telling a story of a seeker after truth who was called upon to bear acts of arbitrariness and harshness of an extreme degree before his teacher would accept him. As Meher Baba's fingers flew over the alphabet board, which he uses for communication, and as his hands raised occasionally in brief gesticulation, I found myself wrapped even more in the teller and manner of telling than in the story. Sitting off to the side and outside his line of vision, I raised my hand almost involuntarily with thumb to forefinger to inscribe the age old circle of perfection. Even as I started to do so, I was warmed to see Meher Baba turn his gaze full upon me and lift his own hand in the identical gesture. Human beings are not too often aware of the feelings of their fellows, let alone minutely responsive to them. And it surprised me to be in the presence of someone who possessed such sensitivity of feeling. I forgot the episode until he was en route to the elevator late in the day, and as I stood among a knot of people at the side of his passageway, I again raised my hand in a similar gesture, now deliberately wondering if he could catch it in the even less probable position in which I was placed. Again, as I started the gesture, he turned until he looked me full in the face and repeated his response. This time, I was even more surprised than delighted at what now began to assume the proportions of an unexplainable phenomenon. As he progressed on out into the hall and finally proceeded through the door of the elevator, I raised my hand quickly a third time to make the gesture of circle of perfection. This time, he turned his entire body and with deliberation repeated his acknowledgement. I do not feel that this is a trivial incident to introduce as important a topic as the basic purpose and mechanics of creation and the author of that treatise. Meher Baba is memorable and eminently satisfying, not because of his undoubted genius in the realm of philosophy and universal mechanics, but because he has the capacity to warm the cockles of one's heart as perhaps no other living being is able to do. In the long run, each one of us is searching for a deeper inner sense of satisfaction and peace, a feeling of being contained in some presence which is trustworthy and loving, for a spontaneous understanding and response to our innermost needs. Above all, we need to be ourselves and to be accepted completely for ourselves. The deep response which Meher Baba elicits from so many people is due to that undreamt of sensitivity to one's most profound self. There are many things of a much more astounding nature which I might recount from the vast lore which has accumulated around this figure in the 4 decades since he achieved his present spiritual stature. But all of them would obscure the one central issue, his complete ability not only to understand, but in some manner to be one's own self. Don't ask me to describe such a phenomenon nor to explain it. It must be experienced to be believed. Even so, one would expect such a feeling of well being to fade gradually after its source had been removed. Even the most ecstatic experience normally fades and becomes a memory, as does a nightmare as well. However, therein lies another of the unexplainable mysteries of contact with such a being. As I sat in the plane en route home after a jammed, eventful weekend, I started to resort back into my usual context of reality, turning over one or two of my pet worries in my mind. I realized suddenly that they no longer worried me. Not being easily panicked into rash conclusions, I sampled several more troubles and was completely puzzled to find that in some instances I could see answers where I had seen none before, and in others I could recapture no sense of agitation. Frankly, I thoroughly expected to renew my usual troubled relation with these difficult subjects as soon as I settled down at home again. But as the days and weeks and months and finally years rolled by, I began to realize that even a short weekend in the company of such a man had performed a major surgery on my emotional anatomy and had removed my ability to worry. I describe these incidents in no sense of pride nor of beating a tom tom. They are two events which occurred in my own life, and I would be remiss to omit them from the small frame which I have been entrusted to construct around the masterly painting created in the following pages. I am sure that I have not knowingly heard God speak, but I am sure that in my lifetime I have seen him act. A nice line. In the choice of a title for his book, God Speaks, Meher Baba has succinctly stated both the major thesis which he is to elaborate, as well as his right to speak authoritatively on subjects which may be treated by only the most advanced of our era. Before discussing the right of the author to imply such a sublime source for his work, it might be well to complete the complexity of the issue by stating quite simply that the greatest proportion of Meher Baba's disciples and followers from all over the world regard him as the avatar of the age. Put in Western terminology, they consider him as the Christ of our times, the successor to the tradition of Muhammad, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Rama, Zoroaster, and so on back into the dusky past, and as the identical nature which reincarnated in those specific and successive personalities. If Meher Baba occupies such a crowning position in the spiritual structure of our civilization, then there would be no question of his right to speak positively and with authority on the deepest mechanics of creation. But the simpler issue of his divine source then becomes the much greater one of the legitimacy of his function in the key role of a religious hierarchy, which in turn is doubted or frankly disbelieved by many people. In two paragraphs, we have stated a tremendous and a challenging problem, but it is one which must be worked out in actuality by means other than the written words of an introduction. In the long run, there are only two reliable answers to the fundamental question of whether a given man is the Messiah. The personal answer can be personal contact. At this writing, this is still physically possible, and many have already availed themselves of this direct attack on the issue. Many have concluded their question in the affirmative. Surprisingly small proportion have reached a definite negative, and another portion have confessed a deep bemusement in which pleasure and delight are two major ingredients, but still with an apparent inability to reach an ultimate conclusion on the ultimate question. The broad and long term answer must be the net assessment which society makes over the generations to come of the forces set in motion. If the words spoken and the concepts advanced seem to grow in vitality and reality, then the man is automatically recognized by hindsight to have been the great sculptor of the divine shape for his age. But no amount of advanced argument nor demonstration can convince society. It is as if the concepts carry their own vitality and become the property and the watchword of the race, regardless of the efforts to conjoin or defeat their purpose. For many, however, there will be no opportunity for personal contact, nor for acceptance or rejection in the flesh. All of us. And as these events are occurring in our age, none of us can rely on the consensus of evaluation that society will have made over the generations that are to come. For these, then, who are in such a position, it is required to peruse and to think and to mull with an open mind, for here may well be a great storehouse of the truth and reality for which each of us searches throughout a lifetime. It is not necessary to make a crisis of acceptance or rejection, but to allow the concepts described to simmer in one's own mental stew pot. Gradually, one's own deep sense of the sufficient, as well as the sheer factuality of life itself, will corroborate or refute the outlines described. During the 5 years which elapsed between the time I first became aware of the fact that there was someone in existence named Meher Baba and my meeting him for the first time in New York, I had ample opportunity to question and rebel and come back to the neutral point of I just don't know on any number of the controversial issues of Meher Baba's life. He is not an easy man either to accept or to reject. That one weekend, with its several opportunities to see him in action, was sufficient to convince me that he was hands down the best storyteller with gentle humor, even via the handicap of an alphabet board, I had ever encountered, the best business mind I had known in a life spent working in big business, the best philosopher I had met, and the most sensitively human and loving individual I had ever enjoyed. These are certainly a sufficiently formidable collection of qualities, but you immediately object that the addition of finite quantities can never produce infinity. Had I decided that he was really the avatar of the age? Frankly, I haven't the foggiest notion, and to me the question is irrelevant. I'm sure I would have no means of judging the qualification and achievements of avatarhood, and further, I had found Meher Baba surpassing all of my previous standards of excellence in areas in which I felt competent to judge. Once the rocket has left my terrestrial sphere, I have no concrete means of identifying its position in stellar space. But this I can say, my own intuition tells me that I shall never again meet an individual with those profound capabilities and that uncanny ability to satisfy me internally, which I found in Meher Baba. I cannot help but think back to a statement which one of my research fellows made some years ago after hearing a brilliant discussion of the real Christ given by a director of the Mormon church. I have an idea, he said, that if Christ were on earth today, almost none of us would recognize or accept him. Those words have peculiar meaning to me now because they have a content much deeper than the apparent cynicism shown on their surface. Almost none of us will recognize him not only because of our ingrained prejudices, but because almost none of us has developed the inner standards of measurement capable of estimating the true size of such a being. His capacity and stature soar off into realms where we are incapable of following. And so we admit our frustration in sizing, even if we have not already succumbed to the virtually insuperable temptation to reject. One of our most frequent crutches in estimating the probable spiritual caliber of a man is to look for miracles accredited to him. What miracles has Meher Baba done to corroborate his stature, you ask? There are many stories of such, and I have personally witnessed events which startled my staid notions of the normalcy of events. However, to start evaluating miracles would fall far short of the actuality and would becloud the reality with trivia. The importance of the advent of a spiritually advanced soul lies not in what he apparently does outside of natural law, but what he is and does within it. Such an individual does not come as some sort of glorified showman to astound by performing feats of incredibility. This would only leave humanity gaping for a short while in amazement rather than affecting the basic pattern of their lives and giving them a gauge by which they might measure their own accomplishments, as reaffirming the ability of any human to achieve such a way of life. I'll pause here and share one other thing which I remember whenever miracles are talked about, right? Baba said that to judge an avatar or to judge God by miracles, he takes the example of Jesus and says that by saying that Jesus brought back people who were who who brought the dead back to life is to reduce him to a fourth planar. Now let that sink in. What he's saying is the aspect of the suspension or the supervention of natural laws is not the only thing that we want. But unfortunately, the human mind gives a lot of importance in general to aspects which are miraculous or which go away from the normal, right? So let's wait, just think of that line. Reduces Jesus Christ to a fourth planar by giving him credit for getting the dead back to life, right? So that's just a comment. I will continue if there are no other comments. These key figures in the history of the spiritual life take on a superhuman job of providing a living example of perfection, demonstrated amid all the restrictions and limitations with which we more usual human beings are faced. To provide such an example by drawing on forces outside our scope or unhampered by many of the restrictions with which we wrestle would clearly not be just, and we would not have every right to disassociate ourselves from such an unrealistic scheme. When the example is provided, however, in a rugged world of harsh realities, subject to all the conditions of those realities, and still turns out incredibly fine, then there is indeed reason to take hope and strive for the same thing. This is one of the functions of such individuals. One of the best established principles of effective teaching is to provide a practical demonstration of the subject matter either through a bench experiment or by field experience. The fact that God Himself should use the identical technique in the demonstration of His realities should astound no one. There are tremendous things which we encounter, and we must not be hasty in our assessment of them. One might ask at this point the circumstances under which a God man manifests. This seems to follow a basic natural law of need, similar to the economic law of supply and demand. When the thread of recognition of spiritual truth begins to fray, this aspect of God responds to the need, and the great awakener is born who will reawaken mankind. As a consequence, the advent of great spiritual teachers has always been associated with crisis in world affairs and has been followed by a resurgence of human development in some field which previously had lain almost fallow. It is good to know that when the avatar comes, he comes to show us the reality of our own selves through laws and techniques which are inherent in nature. It is good to know that these things are hearty, spontaneous, and at least three-dimensional, rather than removed, otherworldly, pale, and two-dimensional. It is good to know that when a legitimate spiritual teacher assigns a task or a discipline, it is effective because it is based on profound insight into the mechanics by which nature produces change and the needs of the individual nature. Spirituality then becomes a challenging matter of robust day to day living rather than a restrictive discipline acquired on Sundays and progressively lost through the week. Well, it still applies to some of us, I think. It applies to me. Saturdays and Sundays are full of spirituality and focus, and then progressively lost through the week. Continuing, it would not be fair to touch on various of the highlights of the history of Meher Baba without discussing several controversial aspects of his nature. For instance, he often changes his plans in midstream or says he intends to do something at a certain time and then delays or seemingly never does it. Isn't this irresponsible and short sighted coming from so great a personage? Meher Baba's process of sudden reversal is indeed rugged, but it does produce valuable results. Those who have lived long with Baba are almost universally notable for their resiliency and adaptability. But in addition to this, there are undoubtedly more basic reasons which have to do with the sheer indeterminacy of the average human being's free will as the functioning of a perfect master on levels of existence other than our own. I cannot help but speculate that there is a direct carryover from the lessons learned in the world of material affairs into the realm of spiritual development. Isn't it true that the individual who has never ossified into a set physical routine, but is rather alert and adaptable, will have a similar adaptability to the multitudinous changes to be made in inner development? The fact that Meher Baba fasts quite frequently is incomprehensible to many people unacquainted with his way of working. Baba has always fasted intermittently for short and long periods, and this phase appears consistently and importantly in his work. This has sometimes been misconstrued as a good and holy act for himself or for penance or spiritual benefit. But it is not for himself, but rather for his work on earth. As Krishna said to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, "Thou son of Pritha, in the three wide worlds, I am not bound to any toil, no height awaits to scale, no gift remains to gain, yet I act here." Third chapter, 22nd. Meher Baba's silence of almost 3 decades and substitution of an alphabet board as means of communication are equally puzzling. Many people may regard it as unproductive to use an alphabet board, and some even label it as a subterfuge. There have been many, there have been a number of discussions by Meher Baba and others on the reasons for this prolonged silence. I do not wish to go into the various potential explanations here, but rather to call attention to the most astounding fact of all. Despite such a severe handicap, the equivalent of having one hand tied behind one's back, Meher Baba has planned minutely and personally the most complex undertakings, taught hundreds and blessed thousands, directed undertakings, and given words of cheer to persons at far distant points, and dictated in a relatively brief period of time is monumental an enterprise as this book. Meher Baba's methods are often productive of exasperation. There are many things which he does which defy understanding. and he blithely goes on about his business without bothering to proffer an explanation. For myself, admire greatly someone who does not sit down at every other step to justify himself, but there are apparently quite sound reasons for such behavior, in that there just is not time for constant explanation, nor is there probably in us the comprehension to encompass an explanation of the more abstruse phases, if given. On February 25, 1894, Meher Baba was born of Persian parents in Pune, India, and was given by them the name Merwan Sheriar, the family name being Irani. In 1914, he became God realized through a kiss on the forehead bestowed by the great Sufi master Hazrat Babajan. In 1915, he met his second master, Upasni Maharaj. In 1921, he became a perfect master. In 1925, he commenced his silence using as a means of communication a small rectangular board on which are painted the letters of the alphabet. Baba forms words quickly by pointing successively to the letters on this board. By this time, he had collected a small group of disciples who called him Meher Baba. In 1931, he went to the Western world and made his first contacts with the West. In 1932, he was feted by many of those whom you and I would perhaps consider Hollywood's greatest. At 58, he broke a leg and an arm in a severe automobile accident in Oklahoma. Now, at the age of 61, Meher Baba is dynamic, active, and acutely aware of all that goes on about him. So, at 58 is 1952 from a year standpoint, and 61 would be 55. I have not tried to give in any detail the events of Baba's earlier life, because they have been ably described in C.B. Purdam's The Perfect Master, followed more recently by Jean Adriel's Avatar. The biographical outline given here is intended as nothing more than a point of orientation, so that we may go on to discuss several of the key issues associated with Baba's life, which are inherently complex and perhaps impossible of interpretation in the long run. There has been much speculation concerning the reason of many of Baba's actions and journeys, but the greater proportion continue to be shrouded in some degree of mystery. In such a situation, the usual procedure is to declare the individual irrational and to write off his actions as delusion. This is not done with Baba for the simple reason that a goodly number of his efforts and suggestions are seen to be based on an insight into the shape of things utterly beyond the average human ken. Often, such an outcome results within hours. Sometimes the verdict of events is not given for weeks or months or even years. So there were three footnotes. The first one was on God realization. So here, that's the first one. The avatar is in reality one with God, but comes into the physical world with a veil which must be removed by a perfect master when the time is right. Hazrat Babajan performed this function for Baba. And then the two book references that he refers to, which are biographies. One is published in 1976 by Sharia Press, A Perfect Master by C.V. Purdom, and a 1971 JFK University Press publication in Berkeley, Jean Adriel's Avatar. Right? Continuing. However, this uncanny insight causes those who have invested more than a few moments of casual criticism to hold their peace and be prepared to find the desirable long-term answer of any of Baba's actions, regardless of how imponderable they may appear at the time. There is further reason to regard Baba's deeds and suggestions with credence. One would be hard put to find one single situation in which his influence has resulted in harm to the individual concerned. He will often push a person to the point of exhaustion or even desperation in order to increase the capacity of that individual. But there is a fine line of the possible which he never transgresses. One of the periods in Baba's life which has both drama and pathos in it is that covering the establishment of his school for boys of all sects and castes. Established in the summer of 1927, it contained at one point a total of 102 boys, of which for whom 49 were Hindus, 20 Muslims, 32 Zoroastrians, and one Christian. One of Baba's favorites among the students, Ali, was removed from the school by his father when he became alarmed by reports that many of the boys in the school had periodic fits of uncontrolled weeping. These were apparently related in some fashion to the daily meditations which the boys carried out. 3 times, Ali's father removed the boy from the school and carried him off to his home in Bombay. 3 times, the boy escaped from the most careful surveillance and made his way back, mostly on foot, to the school. So deep was his loyalty to Baba. Shortly after the occasion of Ali's fourth withdrawal, the schoolboys were all sent home temporarily by Meher Baba, and early in 1929, the school was permanently closed. Soon after this, Baba's period of extended world tours began, and in 7 short years, he made 7 trips to the West and 2 around the world. Attendant on these was some favorable publicity and some that was critical or even scurrilous. Baba has never attempted to develop a favorable press. He persistently maintains that those who attack him do his work equally with those who praise him. So, the details of the school is beautifully described by Ramji Abdullah in Sobs and Throbs, which, by the way, our group read. It is included also in an earlier publication called Ramju's Diaries, published in 92-99. Now, this is introduced by editor Ira G. Dietrich, whom Mahu attributed the dedication to Walnut Creek, California. Hey, his consistency in his attitude of refusing to defend himself or to correct errors in quoting his remarks or even simple misunderstandings is a phenomenon in this day when the world has become convinced of the need for vindication of oneself in the eyes of society. Such absolute indifference might well be attributed to failure to realize practicality, but one ends up with the sense that Baba acts according to deep internal knowledge and is satisfied that the results will occur regardless of interpretation. Great receptions were held for him in Europe and in America, and the publicity which rocketed back and forth on his introduction to Hollywood created a flood of statements which will never be completely integrated. These trips to the West produced their own treasury of incidents rich in human emotion. One that has always interested me deeply has been the account of Baba's meeting with a Russian lady who was profoundly disturbed because of her inability to form any sense of warm relatedness to her daughter, who at that time was in her 20s. Baba stroked her hand and told her that he would help her, and several days later, when she awakened in the morning, she was suffused by a deep and warm sense of love for the daughter, such as she had never known. She asked forgiveness at once of her daughter for her treatment of her in the past, and forthwith there was established a profound and trusting relationship. Another instance which savors of the magic lamp of human emotions was Baba's meeting in Italy with a disturbed and brilliant university professor who unpacked his own knowledge of esoteric philosophy before Baba. After arriving at complete frustration in his efforts to piece together the components of his life's wisdom, in spite of Baba's patience in listening, he finally threw up his hands in despair and asked Baba just to sit quietly with him in meditation. Baba smiled and laid his hand over that of the professor, and those present in the room comment on the rapt sense of peace which suffused the room and gradually erased the appearance of desperation from the face of the man. After a few moments of silence, he suddenly exclaimed, I know now that truth is love. These are miraculous tales of Baba's stay in the cave. There are miraculous tales of Baba's stay in the cave in which Saint Francis of Assisi had once meditated, of a meeting of the hierarchy atop a mountain in the Swiss Alps, of the violent storm which raged as Baba stood untouched in a shaft of light which pierced the disgorging clouds, while those who attended him were drenched as they stood waiting for him a few feet down the slope. There followed some years spent in dealing with the mad and then the spiritually intoxicated. A so-called mad ashram was established at Rahuri in 1936, to which Baba and his disciples brought a number of truly mad individuals. Later, Baba's work was increasingly with the spiritually intoxicated, those who had lost their normal conscious contact with their surroundings as a result of the intoxication of their divine love. The difference between conventional madness and loss of normal consciousness as a result of spiritual ecstasy is recognized in India, and as a tradition, the people care for these latter musts, as they are termed. Baba's work in this field is reminiscent of the function performed for him over the course of 7 years by Upasani Maharaj, the perfect master, who gradually brought him back to full consciousness of his surroundings after the kiss on his forehead by the Sufi master Baba Jan had torn away the veil. Both of these perfect masters selected Meher Baba as their spiritual charge man, spiritual higher, a unique function, uniting the highest flowering of both Hindu and Islamic traditions. Meher Baba's work with the monks in his ashram at Rahuri branched out increasingly, and over the course of the ensuing years, he made more and more trips into the heart and to the far corners of India, contacting, even if for a brief instant, all the available musts and saints. The story of these journeys is replete with instances of severe hardship and the expenditure of great effort on the part of all who participated. For details, see William Donkin, The Wayfarers. Once again, one can only speculate on the inference of such contacts. If I were to hazard a guess, I would suppose that a dual function had been fulfilled. Such spiritually advanced souls certainly control or have available some type of basic psychic or cosmic energy, term it what one may. As a whole, they act something like the worker bee, and India functions somewhat as the honeycomb. Baba, as the royal patriarch of the hive, was setting up his liaison to draw upon this vast store of energy, and in return, no doubt, gave each individual must or saint a further push in his spiritual ongoing. This contacting of the musts reached a climax in the period of 1946 to 1948 and was followed by 2 years of what Baba has called his new life phase, starting on October 16, 1949. This is doubtless the most imponderable of all the imponderables with which the student has to deal. Preceding the new life, Baba broke up all the ashrams maintained for the mas and for the more or less permanent close disciples, as well as for the constant flow of people whose stays range all the way from a brief interview to a period of weeks, months, or years. Provision was made for the care of those who were dependent, and then Baba asked for volunteers to follow him on a series of journeys, often on foot and involving the most severe hardships. Rigid rules of discipline and renunciation were set up before the disciples were asked for volunteers to follow Baba into this new phase of his new life, which was one of exile, helplessness, and renunciation. 20 were finally selected and set out with Baba. The travels and spiritual disciplines of those 2 years were among the most difficult which Baba's disciples have ever undergone. Those who participated in the journeys were tired, thin, and drawn as they emerged in late 1951. The detailing of the events and their significance must await a more extensive work, but the onlooker cannot help but conclude that in this obscure phase there was established a major blueprint for the future individual and social development of the race. On October 16, 1950, Baba had stated at Mahabaleshwar, "My old life places me on the altar of godhood and divine perfection. My new life makes me take the stand of a humble servant of God and his people. In my new life, I am the seeker, the lover, and the friend. Both these aspects, perfect divinity and perfect humility, have been God's will, and both are everlastingly linked with God's eternal life." On February 13, 1951, Baba had gone into seclusion at Mahabaleshwar for about 100 days, the end of which he stated that on October 16, it would be necessary for him to enter another phase of his work. This latter came to be this later came to be known as the Manonash, annihilation of the mind period. This work lasted for 4 months, ending February 16, 1952. Baba then announced that he and a few disciples would leave shortly for the United States and that he would lead from March 21 to July 10, 1952, complicated free life in which weakness would predominate over strength. From July 10th to November 15, full free life in which strength would predominate over weakness. And from November 15th on a theory free life in which both strength and weakness would be consumed in the fire of divinity. On April 20th, 1952, Baba arrived in New York with 6 men and 6 women disciples of both Eastern and Western origins. They went directly to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where a property had been dedicated to Baba. And after a period of several weeks, Baba received many old and new followers, particularly on May 17th, when a vast crowd congregated from all over the United States to see him. The group then set out by car for California and another projected series of interviews. While crossing Oklahoma, the car carrying Baba was struck, and 4 of the 5 occupants seriously injured in one of the heartbreaking incidents so common to our highways. In the nearby little town of Prague, Oklahoma, there existed, by great good fortune, a small private hospital operated by Dr. Burleson. The efforts of this man and his tiny staff, confronted with a mass of body flesh and stained clothing in which were entangled a silent master and his injured companions, is certainly an epic in the constant drama of the medical world in its ceaseless battle to alleviate misery and prolong life. As the tangle of misery was gradually sorted out, it became clear that no one was in immediate danger, but the number of broken bones and the areas of skinless and abraded flesh were formidable. For days, the dull and dreary routine of setting, cleaning, bandaging, and pumping in of new life went on. Baba's broken left leg and arm and severe contusions of the face were not the most severe of the injuries, but among the most painful. After 2 weeks, the party returned by ambulance to South Carolina in a period of recuperation. How could a great spiritual leader allow such an accident to happen to himself and his followers? Surely he could foresee and prevent it. I wonder how many times these questions have been asked. Actually, Baba had predicted long ago as 1928 such an accident to himself and the necessity for it. He had even mentioned on occasion that it would be necessary to spill his blood in America. But such a declaration on my part of "he knew it all the time" falls wide of the central issue. The great spiritual leaders of the ages, have never avoided the mishaps of a reckless and unheeding civilization. In fact, they have embraced their portion of human catastrophe and have lived it through without recourse to the arbitrary usage of the cosmic power at their fingertips. The supreme function of the spiritually great is not what they do outside the law of our physical world, but what they do within it. I think a very beautiful way to deal with miracles and masters. In 1937, Baba had explained this function of the perfect masters. Perfect master, who has to take upon himself the burdens of the world, to absorb them, must necessarily have physical reactions and consequently must suffer physically like ordinary human beings. By submitting themselves to the law of action and reaction, the perfect masters establish that law and are selflessly and willingly subject to it. But in spite of subjecting themselves to this law, they stand above the law and could rid themselves from physical reactions. What then would be the meaning and purpose of action and reaction? Perfect masters absorb the dual effect of the universal illusion by taking humanity out of the illusion through liberating mankind from the bonds of action and reaction. The perfect master absorbs duality in his true existence in order to sublimate it. There was a quotation, a footnote. At that time, Baba had yet made no public statement regarding his avatarhood, and he was generally regarded as a perfect master, Sadguru. However, in Supplement 30, Baba explains the difference between the roles of avatar and perfect master. After additional days
Karthik,
of it,
Karthik,
yeah,
hold on,
yeah,
hold on.
yeah, yeah,
Did you get what he's mentioning here in regard to the perfect master and their role in the illusion and duality?
yes. So if you look at the role of the perfect master, so as compared to avatar, there's a little distinction, but I don't think Baba is going into that distinction here. So what he's saying is they actually submit themselves to the law. So there is the operation of the divine laws, and uh, the perfect masters submit themselves to the law of action and reaction and willingly subject themselves to it, right? But they don't feel the pain of it. You know what I mean? The perfect masters. But the avatar actually feels and carries the entire load on his own shoulders and actually experiences the pain because he has come down to the level of the human. Whereas the perfect master does not feel the pain. And this is handled in greater detail in discourses. But here, all he's talking about is the perfect master knows the divine laws, subjects himself to the divine laws to prove to the world that that applies to everybody.
So, in other words, the perfect masters do not suffer, only Avatar does.
Yes, correct. In fact,
Mm.
that's the literal words given by Baba. In
Hmm.
that sense, Baba, Avatar suffers, whereas there is no suffering for the perfect master because he's only acting. So he
Yeah, he's only
subjects,
acting.
he uses
Hmm.
the word acting, yes. So
Yeah, he uses.
acting as in proving to the world that the perfect master is also subject to the natural laws, the law of karma, the law of action and reaction, and so on.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just wondering if how is it that they don't suffer? Because and I know that Baba said that they are acting, but how is it that they don't suffer? Because they possess whatever avatar has: universal body, universal mind, um, and all others layers. So yeah, I've always had that question: how is it that they are not suffering? I mean, by acting, I think Baba explained it, they bring themselves to your level and my level and start, acting like an ordinary human being and so forth, and say things that you like. And Baba says they usually adore people, do this just to attract them toward themselves and stuff like that. I've read it, God knows where. And but still, I am puzzled that how come they don't suffer. I mean,
Uh, Honestly, very, very fair question. Why is the distinction? I mean, why is there a distinction between the experience of the avatar and the experience of the perfect master? And why does the avatar actually have to endure the pain and the suffering directly, uh, whereas the perfect master does not? I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's more to uh, I mean, the pain and suffering is representative of the civilizational pain and suffering. So, by undertaking or rather experiencing the pain, Baba is actually doing universal work, which helps the universality, the larger pain and ill effects that civilization and creation have. Right. So that's what I would think. But I
yeah,
don't know why the
obviously.
perfect master, yeah, but I don't know why the perfect master doesn't do that. I don't have an answer. Right.
Mm.
Kama, do you have anything to say on this? Because is Kama there?
I
Oh,
don't think
Kama's not
he's
there.
here. No,
He's
I don't
yeah, he's
think
not
he's
there.
here.
Yeah, yeah. No, because he was the first to point this out to us very early during discourses. But yeah, I thought maybe he has some other cross reference from some other quote or Baba
But
text.
because, like, for example, now Baba is not in physical body,
Mhm.
but there are another five perfect masters that we don't know.
So it,
But
it
there's always five that hold the office and do work for Baba. And so I wonder if they have to get the burden of the world, or they're immune from it anyway. So that's something to just ponder upon, just think about it later. Yeah.
Smiling and
I
thinking of
think
what Parks would have said. What Parks would have said once one of us gets to perfect master. Please tell us. Tell the
yeah,
rest. So in this,
it's
yeah,
just
Sanjay.
that it's just that when the things are not right. I mean, you designate roles to people and they work in the field. Just you look at it from the corporate setting, as
Mhm.
both of us keep giving these examples. And when things are not right, he descends and he takes over. No, let me do this. That kind of. So the perfect masters, after uh, the boss dawns on the ground, he hits the ground to do things. Their roles get limited. That way.
So,
Just try to.
Yeah.
My words are not very clear, but that's what I mean. Actually, can
no,
maybe make some sense.
I think
Yeah.
the no, all of us agree on the extra role and the burden that the avatar takes over and above that of the perfect master. We are not fighting that, but we're just wondering why, and probably why not, rather why the perfect master does not do the same as well when there are five of them. But again, there are some things that are uh, things that our limited mind will always keep asking. They are neither important in the bigger scheme of things for our spiritual progress, nor can they be comprehended by us. So I think This
Yeah.
could be one of those.
Yeah. Okay.
So let me
Mhm.
just finish the message, and then I have some thoughts on this message itself, and then we'll break for the day. So I continue.
Yeah.
After additional days of interviews with people in New York, Baba set out by air for a visit with followers, old and new, in Europe, returning to India in late August 1952. Almost at once, he set out on further journeys in that country to contact a few more musts, but now his activities focalized more on giving spiritual blessing to the great masses who thronged to the locations announced for his public appearances.
Mhm.
These mass darshans culminated in September 1954 when he called on his male followers throughout the world to congregate at his ashram in Ahmednagar for a last spiritual conclave. About 1,000 collected from the various corners of India and the far reaches of Asia, Europe, and America. Those who arrived early witnessed on September 12th the congregation of 60,000 souls from the countryside surrounding Ahmednagar to receive Baba's blessing in the form of prasad. Following this colorful and moving occasion, each afternoon Baba personally instructed the travelers. On September 29th, Baba addressed the 1,000 who had collected at his call, blessed them, and sent them on their way. On October 7th, he abandoned the use of even his alphabet board, depending now only on gestures for communication. It is interesting to note that the gestures Baba uses for communications are not the alphabetical ABCD, the formation of fingers a silent person is apt to make use of, nor a sign language as used by the deaf and dumb, but free and easy and somewhat exaggerated gestures uniquely his own that describe most vividly what he wishes to convey. Once again, Baba announced that the breaking of his silence, his manifestation, and his death were all near. Baba has said that when he breaks his silence, he will speak only one word, the word of words, which will penetrate the hearts of men. Thus, in collaboration with Mushida Dus, I have tried to bring up to date once again the eventful life of Avatar Meher Baba. It is left to history to sort out and weigh in the perspective of accumulating events, the significance of his life and actions. We who participate in the immediacy of the now can only offer the measure of our love and human allegiance and declare our gratitude for the great thing that has come into our lives. Don E. Stevens. So there is another introduction to the second edition. But before we go there, I had a question and maybe based on the responses, some comments as well. What is that strikes you the most when you read this introduction? I would urge you to think of being in 1952, 1955 actually, being at the same time where Baba is in his physical form and the book is coming out, and you are obviously eager to read this book, and then you read this introduction. As a person who is aware of Baba at that time, and I would dare say, as a Baba lover, what would your reactions be on this on this introduction? Anybody?
One thing for close Baba lovers at that time, maybe it was a summary of all of Baba's activities, Baba's say, uh, appearance, and his movement till that time, from say normal human being to an awakened uh, soul, and then his activities one after the other, having some sort of a serial significance. So all that is brought out in a summary way in this introduction. That's what I feel. Jai Baba.
Very good. I agree with you. So it's almost a brief biography and so on. But what else strikes you? Anything else?
Yes, is the earlier question that you had posed, and we had some discussion about the uh, great difference between the avatar and the
Perfect
master.
master.
Perfect masters are, say, they are grilled in the different karmic cycles, and they ascend at each level. And because of this real torture that they go through, maybe in the higher planes they are given some sort of a benefit of not suffering. Whereas Avatar, as he comes down on his own, without all this paraphernalia for the second time, first time he had it. So he gives examples of the suffering and the effect of suffering, or shows it to the whole of mankind and the universe uh, to exemplify. And in the background, his individual suffering is a suffering of the whole universe, or his corrective measures towards that. In the process, he goes through the suffering. Probably that is one way of looking at it. Jai Baba.
Not sure I understood fully what you're saying, but you're saying that the is that the competence of the perfect master to be able to take on the the burden and universal work and also suffering. So he's given like a reprieve, saying, okay, you'll not face the suffering, but you got to do a lot more universal work, something like that.
Maybe that is the maybe the avatar works with those
Yeah, he has a lot
five
more
or
competence. He has a
com-
lot more ability to take that load compared to perfect master, who's nothing but someone who's gone through the spiritual progression to reach the top. But after reaching the top, he's given work, so he comes back. And when he comes back, he obviously has still, in spite of being perfect, has certain limitations. That's interesting. That's something to think about. There are no
yes,
straight answers and there's no right and wrong, right? So it's about
yes,
just what we think
yes,
and what we reconcile to ourselves on this. To me, on this read, I've read this introduction earlier as well many times, right? So in this particular read, I was just reading as a Baba lover, and the comment I have to make is I think it's a very, very courageous introduction in the sense, A, it's very, very brutally honest, right? It questions things about Baba in a book, which Baba said is his most important work, right? And that tells you something. That tells you something about what Baba wants this to be. He wants it to be something that he has represented all through his life, which is I am what I am. I'm not here to conform. I'm not here to be what is expected as the rule book or what is expected as the normal practice in religion and spirituality. I am what I am, and paint me as it is. And that's exactly what Don has done, which I think is more a tribute to Baba. And of course, Don was a tool in bringing out that transparent and real biographical outline with even the questions. So he puts the questions, he questions the indeterminate nature of decisions of Baba. He explains things he does not understand and leaves questions with the reader. Now, when you have the burden of writing a very important foreword to what is a very, very remarkable book, you always think of the positives, right? So what struck me in this reading was that there is a balance, that there is a neutrality, that there is a fair view that Don has taken. And I think that's a tribute to Baba, because Baba has made him write it like that. So that's what I saw. I hope I'm making sense.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you make sense. I like to add also to this. Um, it's just not today that we read this introduction. What I got, I've gotten different things before.
Mhm.
But today it's what I got is kind of Don explains his own journey of getting to know the God man
Mhm.
and the challenges that in the beginning he had with accepting him as the most perfect being, and how he was testing him, and how he he had questions and so forth. And I thought the reason that perhaps, I'm sure he wrote this introduction and showed it to Baba, and Baba agreed with it. Um, I think the reason that maybe Baba agreed to this, again, I don't know, this is all guesswork, uh, is that many people who would, first of all, even people who are with Baba, I mean, new to Baba, the title of this book itself is uh, it's raising eyebrows or raising question. God speaks. Well, many people that come from different religion, they didn't even know that God could speak. How does the God speak? Is the God is a human to speak? God has always been unfathomable, beyond, and now he's claiming that he speaks, you know. And then this introduction comes where Don explains his own challenges step by step, and how he gets closer and closer to accepting him as who he is. And I'm pretty sure Baba is working on him and so forth. But uh, any reader who could read this introduction perhaps would relate to this. The question that he's arising maybe comes up to other people's mind also, you know. And he raised the question, he answers it. He raised the question, he answers it. Like that. And I think he purposely do that, so then people people's doubts and questioning in the beginning just get a little bit cleared up, so they can really focus on what Baba says from page 1 and on, rather than
Yep.
second guessing him, doubting him, that, criticizing him, stuff like that. Anyway, that was uh, my take uh, tonight from the introduction.
That's very interesting. And thanks for sharing. Any other thoughts before we wrap up? We are already out of time, but we'll do it
Okay,
quickly.
one more thing I like to share is very interesting, and it's about my, not very interesting, but it's about my own journey. One thing that really brought me inner conviction to Meher Baba and accepting him as a God in human form was this book, this
Okay.
very same book. And I think because of my little bit of, who knows, little bit of intellectual background I had before I come to him, he used that as a vehicle to for me to read it and wonders and get fascinated and all that stuff and answer my question. And then toward the end, I said, "He's it. It can't be anybody else. He is the creator." You know.
Wow.
And so I'm sure other people might have a similar experience as well. Yeah, Tia Baba.
Well, I don't have that experience. In fact, the it's very far from that. I struggle to understand anything that is said in this book the first time I read it and gave up on it for a few pages. And I have to credit this group and above all Baba to work through us and with us to help me uh, make this journey and fall in love with this book. Each time I read it, I've seen different facets, but more importantly, it's a it's if you get to the last part, right, the before the conclusion, the states of God, it actually circles back and what what the book starts off as is a third party account. You're talking about somebody else. But then and by the time you come to the ninth part, you realize
Hmm.
that that third party is you. It's just you and which is God. So
Yeah, that's
it's a
true.
circular,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful circular reference, and it's a amazing book, no doubt about it. So
Yeah, no wonder
I
Baba recommended to many, many people, go read Bhagavad Speaks, go read, go read. Not one
true.
time, two times, three times. Yeah.
So, having said that, it's not for the faint-hearted in the sense that you can easily be put off by the language, easily, right? And I say that uh, with due respect
Why do you
to
say
the.
language? I don't understand when you use the word
So,
language. What do you
when
mean?
I'm saying it language, I'm saying it in semantics, in
Uh-huh.
style, in use of repetition, in
Yes.
use of complex or difficult words, right? Discourses also suffers from that in certain parts. But what happens is uh, the world that we live in wants simplification, right? We are so used
Yeah,
to
that's true.
simplification, right?
That's
So
true.
complex stuff is a put up. So our mind hates certain things which are complex. Our mind wants simplified stuff, right? Tell it to me like I am five, right? So
Yeah.
in that barometer, God speaks struggles. But then maybe there is a reason for that as well, because He doesn't want this to for everybody. So there has to be a level of seriousness and intent before you can unlock the mysteries of divine life, of life divine rather, right? So he
No.
wants that commitment and conviction and interest and intent to solidify before one gets here, maybe because nothing is random.
The thing
Baba
about
has
it,
not done anything randomly, right? If he can
yeah.
write the prayer so simply with very
Mm,
simple words, if you take the beloved God prayer, it's such a simple set of lines, very
that's
simple
right.
words.
That's true.
Whereas God speaks us on the other side of the semantics complexity. So there's a purpose. I'm
Got,
sure there is a
Yeah,
purpose.
there is a purpose. You're right.
got,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Yes,
think
Sanjay ji.
I think Baba has tried to make it very simple. The very fact that you said repetition of words as if he's teaching a child, very
Yes.
very simple things, plain wise. But the subject itself is so complex, and I think Baba has tried to make it very simple as possible. But it's that it's the mankind or minds are not that evolved to grasp that much simplified way that Baba is trying to explain a complex subject. I would take it like that. I think. I mean, is it possible that you can explain it better in some words? It's like a gold standard. You have the ISO's standards and everything. So you have to infer out of it. Actually, it is not.
expected to be that explanatory so that because volumes and volumes and volumes of books will not be able to explain what Baba is trying to say. So I think he has struck a right balance and tried to explain it as simple as possible. But beyond that, we need to comprehend it actually ourselves by repetitive readings.
Yes,
And uh,
yes.
and Baba's help would come. And when our consciousness is evolved to that level, it will dawn to us. That I would put it like that. It's not about the
Absolutely.
book that it. Yeah, Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, Jai Baba. So, with that, I was also in parallel looking up what Mahu mentioned on the dedication. I I think I've hit upon a gold mine. There is a publication called Meher Abode from, I think, Australia, the Meher Abode Gazette, which talks about this in one full um, uh, edition. So basically, they have dedicated
Yeah,
one
yeah.
edition. Yeah,
This
so I'll
this
send that. I'll send that
publication
out.
was this publication was getting done by me and David Israel. David Israel is Sufi, and he's the one who did this part about Ira and the history of
Yeah.
God Speaks, and that's how I got to know about it. Merobot Gazette. Yeah,
Yes, yes,
it's about.
Meherabad Gazette. Now
This
I
is
see
gonna
it's
be very
California, Southern California. So
yeah, yeah,
I'll
yeah. Los
share this.
Angeles, California.
Yeah, I'll share this on the group, and maybe
Good.
we can even read it together next week before we
Yeah,
start. Yeah, yeah,
that's very nice. Yeah, in
yeah, yeah.
fact, yeah.
All right. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
to everybody. But before we go, let's not forget, let's spend a minute of
Yeah,
silence looking
let's
at
do that.
Baba or closing your eyes. Yeah. Avatar Meher Baba
Meher
Ki Jai.
Baba ki jai.
Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
Jay. Thank you, and see you
And
all
have a
next week.
great, absolutely looking forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking
A
forward.
great
Bye
week.
bye. Thank you,
Jai
Karthik.
Baba.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye.